Crawl if you have to. That's what my stepbrother muttered as my wheelchair got stuck on the step leading into the dining room. My family didn't offer a hand. They just laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that echoed through my father's million-dollar estate. They thought my accident 6 months ago had stripped away my dignity, my future, and my place in this family. They believed I was coming to Sunday dinner to beg for my inheritance. But they had no idea why I actually showed up. They saw a quiet, broken girl sitting in a chair. They didn't see the legal folder tucked into the side pocket of my wheels, or the recorded phone calls stored on my phone. 5 minutes later, the laughter completely died. The arrogance washed off their faces, and my father was on his knees in front of me, begging for mercy. Here is how it happened. My name is Claire Vance. At 31 years old, my entire life was rewritten in a split second by a shattered windshield and a crushed spine. 6 months ago, I was an independent archivist, managing historic documents and building a quiet, successful life for myself. After the accident, I was suddenly a woman bound to a wheelchair, forced to navigate a world that treated me like I was made of glass. For half a year, I stayed away from the Vance family estate, a sprawling, million-dollar mansion in the hills that smelled of fresh paint and old money. My father, Richard Vance, hadn't visited me once in the rehab center. He sent flowers. Expensive, impersonal orchids with printed cards signed by his secretary. So when the sudden invitation arrived for a family reconciliation dinner, I knew it wasn't out of love. Rolling up the grand paved driveway, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The estate was built on power and optics. My late mother had poured her own wealth and soul into this ground, but now it belonged to the people who had replaced her. My father, his second wife Evelyn, and her insufferable 40-year-old son, Julian. As I parked my accessible van and unloaded my wheelchair into the cold evening air, I looked up at the towering glass doors. I knew I was rolling straight into a snake pit, but they didn't know I wasn't coming as prey. The front doors were unlocked, so I wheeled myself inside. The marble foyer echoed with the sharp clinking of crystal glasses from the dining room. As I rolled past the grand archway, 3 pairs of eyes locked onto me. "Oh, Claire," my stepmother Evelyn drawled, setting down her wine glass with a slight grimace. "You're finally here. We were starting to think the logistics were too much for you. That chair really disrupts the flow of the entryway, doesn't it?" I kept my chin up, refusing to give her the reaction she wanted. "It gets me where I need to go, Evelyn." I moved toward the dining table, but the heavy oak threshold created a 2-inch drop into the room. My small front wheels hit the ridge and jammed. I pushed down on the rims, but my arms were exhausted from the drive. Julian, my stepbrother, stood at the head of the table in a tailored suit, a glass of expensive scotch in hand. He didn't step forward to help. Instead, he leaned back, a smug smirk spreading across his face. "Crawl if you have to," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for the entire room to hear. Evelyn let out a sharp, cruel giggle, quickly covering her mouth. My father, Richard, sat at the end of the table. He didn't reprimand Julian. He didn't even look me in the eye. He just stared into his plate, his silence speaking volumes. "Let's get down to business," my father said coldly, clearing his throat as I finally maneuvered past the threshold. "Claire, we invited you here to settle things. Given your condition, you can no longer manage real responsibility. I'm officially removing you from the family trust and business holdings tonight. Julian will be taking over your share." Julian grinned, raising his glass in a mock toast. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought I was going to cry. Julian took a slow, triumphant sip of his scotch, waiting for my tears. Evelyn leaned back, crossing her arms with the smug satisfaction of a predator that had finally backed its prey into a corner. They truly believed they had stripped away my dignity, my inheritance, and my place in this world. What they didn't realize was that I had been expecting this exact ambush for months. While I was recovering in the hospital, learning how to rebuild my life from a wheelchair, I noticed something strange. Small, unauthorized financial transfers were trickling out of my late mother's original trust fund. Someone was quietly draining the account I was supposed to inherit. My family assumed I was too broken, too overwhelmed by my injury to notice what they were doing in the dark. They thought my mind had shattered along with my spine. They were wrong. Instead of confronting them right away, I played the helpless, grieving daughter. I kept quiet and let them believe I was completely defeated. But behind the scenes, from my hospital bed, I hired a brilliant forensic accountant and a private investigator. For 6 months, while Julian was out buying sports cars and Evelyn was upgrading her jewelry, my team was quietly cataloging every single dollar they stole. They thought they had trapped a broken girl in a wheelchair. They had no idea I had spent the last half year laying a trap of my own. I unzipped the leather bag resting on my lap and pulled out a thick, navy blue folder. The sharp slap of the file hitting the mahogany table shattered the smug silence of the room. "What is this, Claire?" my father demanded, his brow furrowing as he set his fork down. "If this is some dramatic plea for an allowance, you're wasting your time." "Read it, Dad," I said, my voice steady, calm, and ice-cold. Julian chuckled nervously, but as my father opened the folder, the color drained from his face so fast it looked like he'd seen a ghost. Inside were 6 months of forensic financial audits, complete with bank stamps, wire transfer receipts, and certified copies of my mother's original estate deeds. "You see, Julian," I said, turning my eyes to my stepbrother, whose smirk was rapidly melting away, "you didn't just drain my trust fund. You and Evelyn embezzled over $3 million from Dad's firm using offshore shell accounts. Accounts I now have total access to." Evelyn gasped, springing to her feet. That's absurd. She's lying. She's delusional. "And there's one more detail you all forgot," I continued, leaning forward in my chair. "This house, the land it sits on, and 51% of the voting shares in Vance Enterprises never belonged to you, Dad. My mother held them solely in her name. Upon her passing, her entire portfolio was placed into a protected trust, a trust that automatically transferred full control to me on my 31st birthday, 2 weeks ago." The room went deathly silent. The arrogant laughter was gone. The fake sympathy was gone. In 5 short minutes, they realized the person in the wheelchair didn't come to beg. She came to take back everything. My father's hands shook so violently, the paper rattled in his grip. His eyes scanned page after page. The bank fraud, the tax evasion, the forged signatures carrying Julian's handwriting and Evelyn's authorization. The sheer magnitude of their crimes meant total legal and financial destruction for Vance Enterprises. Suddenly, my father looked up at me, his eyes wide with sheer panic. The cold, unyielding patriarch who had ignored my recovery for 6 months suddenly looked 20 years older. He didn't just lean over. He pushed his chair back and dropped heavily to his knees right beside my wheels. "Claire, please," my father choked out, his voice cracking as he reached out to grasp the armrest of my wheelchair. "My own daughter, please don't do this. Don't call the authorities. Don't freeze the corporate accounts. It will ruin us. It will ruin me." Seeing my father on his knees, begging for mercy, didn't give me the satisfaction I thought it would. It only filled me with a deep, cold clarity. Behind him, the illusion of family completely dissolved. Evelyn threw her crystal glass across the room, shattering it against the wall as she rounded on Julian. "You told me she wouldn't notice," she screamed, her voice shrill with terror. "You said you handled the paper trail, you idiot." "Shut up, Mom. You were the one asking for more cash, every month." Julian yelled back, his face turning a blotchy, panicked red as he backed away from the table. I looked down at the man kneeling before me. The father who had let them humiliate me, who had sat in silence just minutes ago when Julian told me to crawl. "You didn't care about my dignity, Dad," I said quietly, looking directly into his tear-filled eyes. "So, why should I care about yours?" I pulled 3 identical stapled documents from my bag and set them on the table right in front of my kneeling father. "These are formal legal agreements," I said, my tone as sharp as a razor. Item 1. Julian and Evelyn immediately resign from all positions within Vance Enterprises and surrender every asset purchased with embezzled funds. Item 2. Dad, you surrender your operational authority to an independent board of directors. Item 3. Evelyn and Julian have 24 hours to vacate this property. Julian stepped forward, his fists clenched, his voice trembling with desperation. And if we don't sign? Then my attorney presses send on a digital filing to the federal prosecutor and the state tax division. I replied without missing a beat. You won't just be broke, Julian. You'll be spending the next 15 to 20 years in a federal penitentiary for grand larceny and wire fraud. My father didn't hesitate. With trembling fingers, he snatched a pen from his breast pocket and signed his name at the bottom of the page. Evelyn was sobbing, signing her copy with a shaking hand while cursing Julian under her breath. Julian stood frozen for a few seconds before realizing he had no moves left. He grabbed the pen and scribbled his signature, practically throwing it back onto the table. I took the signed documents, slid them safely into my side folder, and backed my wheelchair away from the table. You have until 6 o'clock tomorrow evening to clear your personal belongings out of my house, I told them. As I turned my wheels and navigated past the threshold toward the front doors, the screams and finger-pointing erupted behind me. The Vance family empire was crumbling into dust, and I didn't look back once. 3 months later, the dust finally settled. I sold the sprawling estate that had held so much pain and bought a single-story, fully accessible home on the coast, where the ocean breeze carries a sense of total freedom. Julian's luxury cars were seized to repay the stolen funds, and he now works 2 dead-end jobs just to stay ahead of his creditors. Evelyn filed for divorce the moment the money ran out, moving back to her hometown broke and bitter. My father was forced into early, quiet retirement, living on a modest pension while watching the company my mother built flourish under an ethical, professional board. As for me, I used a portion of my mother's restored legacy to establish the Vance Rehabilitation and Justice Fund. We provide legal support and financial resources to people with disabilities who are being taken advantage of by greedy relatives or dishonest caretakers. My injury shattered my spine, but it revealed my true strength. They thought my wheelchair made me weak, helpless, and easy to discard. They learned the hard way that true power doesn't come from standing on 2 feet. It comes from standing up for yourself, no matter how you have to move forward. If you were in my shoes, would you have given them 24 hours to sign? Or would you have sent them straight to prison without warning? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to tell me what city you're watching from. If you love this story of payback and justice, click the video on your screen right now for another incredible story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for watching.